So a video here, it's not going to be a quick video, it's about to say a quick video about historic vehicles and registering a historic vehicle in Spain, and more specifically a historic vehicle from the UK. Okay, so we had an inquiry actually, or a question from the brother of a very good client of ours, lovely family, and I was about to write an email explaining the process and everything. It was just, and to answer the questions, it'd just be a lot easier to do a video. And he did mention in his email that he'd been looking at videos and hadn't found the answer. So I thought, hey, great, YouTube. So anyway, what I want to talk about specifically is bringing over a UK registered vehicle, which is over 30 years old, and how you can keep it in Spain, if you can keep it in Spain, and the registration process. Okay, so first of all, just to explain, any vehicle over 30 years old in Spain can be registered as historic, and in many occasions it's the only way you can register a vehicle that is only 30 years old, because it doesn't have European conformity. I just want to explain that, as we know, and this is before I get into the historic part of the video, any vehicle that you have owned for more than 6 months, you can register for change of residence, which waives the need for European conformity. And in the case of vehicles which are over 30 years old, you can register them for change of residence. Okay, if you've owned the vehicle for more than 6 months, then when you take it to the ITV technical inspection, you won't need to go through the historic verification process. Okay, just be aware though that you won't get the benefits of registering a vehicle as an historic vehicle, i.e. you'll have ITVs every year, you won't get the historic plates, and you may have to pay extra insurance. Okay, so there's, before we start talking about historic vehicles, as we know, and I've spoken about registering vehicles with change of residence in the past, if you've owned a vehicle for more than 6 months, then you can register it for change of residence, which waives the need for European conformity. Also, just to say, is a slight confusion with vehicles in the UK, because as we know, in the UK, the registration document isn't proof of ownership, it's proof of the registered keeper. But here, for some reason, they take the date that you were registered as the registered keeper as the date that you were the registered owner. I don't know why, that seems to be the general rule. Okay, and that's the DGT here in Spain. So to do it for change of ownership, for change of residence, you would need to A, have your residence after the date that is shown as you are the registered keeper on the logbook, and you would have had to have owned it for 6 months at that point. So anyway, I want to park that. So let's forget change of residence for a minute, and let's talk about registering a historic vehicle in Spain now from the UK. So we always break things down into 3 sections. We break it down into tax, technical, and trafico. Right, so tax being what taxes would this vehicle be liable for? Technical being how would you register a historic vehicle and what's required? And trafico is when you go to trafico, what is required there to finalise the registration. So the first thing I want to talk about is tax. Okay then, so if you're bringing any vehicle from the UK, and an historic vehicle isn't an exception, you have to now go through customs and excise. Okay, so that means you have to pay the VAT and duty on the import. Now, as we know, for change of residence, you might be able to waive that, but we're not talking about change of residence at the moment. We're talking about bringing a vehicle over in normal circumstances. So the first thing is you would have to import it and pay the tax and duty on that vehicle. Now, how do they judge that tax? Well, it's quite tough, because with historic vehicles, a lot of them don't figure on the BOE book of valuation here in Spain, which means that they can't go directly to, should we say, a qualified valuation from the state and make a calculation of the vehicle's price. Historic vehicles, as we know, can range, from anything that's in good conditions. You get I don't know, an E-Type Jag, which is in good condition and it's a 6-figure sum, and you get one which is, knackered, and you want to import it and it needs a lot of work doing to it. It could only be 20 grand, I don't know, you know. So the variation in the price of vehicles now historic is very, very difficult to judge, and you've got to remember that you're dealing with the tax office. So what will the tax, you'll have an import agent probably doing this for you, and what they'll initially ask for is either a valuation of the vehicle. So if you've got a professional classic car club or somebody who can provide you with a valuation of that vehicle, they may consider that. If you have brought it in the last 2 or 3 years and you have a private contract, or you bought it from a dealership and you have a purchase invoice, then they may consider that. But ultimately, you have to give them as much proof of what the vehicle's worth, and then it's the tax office in Customs and Excise who will decide what tax you are going to pay and what duty you're going to pay. Remember, it's 21% VAT and 10% duty on the deemed value of that vehicle. What I have to say as well, that is at that moment, if they accept that valuation, with all things tax office, as we know, it's not just vehicles, but anything tax office, there is 4 years for them to actually review the file. So say, for example, they could do it with tax returns in Spain. Any action which is taken at the tax office, they have a 4-year window to review that, and if they feel that at the moment that was paid, there's more tax due, then they can come back to you for the extra tax. Okay. So that's the import side of things. So you have to definitely pay the duty and import tax, the VAT. Once you've got that paid, you get a document called a DUA. Now, before moving on to the technical requirements, I also want to explain about the special registrations tax. Now, when registering a vehicle in Spain, you have to pay special registrations tax. Normally that will be paid on the deemed value of the vehicle. Again, it's difficult to judge the value of a historic vehicle, and it's done with a different section of the tax office. All right, so you've got the Customs and Excise, which is Hacienda Customs and Excise. They have their own office, they'll deal with that tax. And then you've got the tax office who deal with special registrations tax, because once you've paid the import tax, the special registrations tax is paid, should we say, within the EU. It's still something that all EU cars pay. You've imported it, you now have to pay the registrations tax when you come to finalise the registration. And if you've got a favourable valuation from Customs and Excise, i.e. you've got away with declaring a low value, it doesn't necessarily mean that the tax office will accept that valuation, and they may turn around and say, well, we've got our own valuation. Okay, so that's the 3 sort of tax hurdles you've got to jump when registering a car. Generally, the special registrations tax is 12%. So you could end up paying up to 42% of the vehicle's value in tax to get it registered. Okay, 43%, so I'm thinking off my head, so it's 20% VAT, 21% VAT, 10% duty, and it is 12% on the special registrations tax. So there you go. So work that out on a car that's valued at 10 grand. So now we've spoken about the tax, let's talk about the technical requirements. And I'm also going to talk about why Upsticks is not registering historic vehicles moving forward here in Malaga. We may consider other areas of Spain, but definitely not here in Malaga. I'm going to explain why. Because here, to get the vehicle through the ITV test, there's like a 3-stage process. First of all, you have to complete some technical documentation. So the first thing you need is an historic study. Now, this historic study is done by a registered, they call them laboratorios in Spanish. They're not labs. They're not sat there with masks on and like test tubing like COVID style. It's just like that's what they call them. And generally you'll get a technician come out. We'll look at the car. You have to take the car to them. They measure it, they take photos and stuff, and they come up with what they call historic studies. It's a verification of the vehicle. They verify that the vehicle is original, because you can't have any modifications to a historic car. It's got to be either original or restored as original. And they produce like a 10 or 15 page document which proves this. You then have to have a document called a ficha técnica. This is all matriculations, all vehicles that you register have to have this document if they don't have a certificate of conformity, and evidently the historic vehicle won't have a certificate of conformity because it doesn't have European conformity, so you have to have a ficha técnica reducida. Again, because a lot of historic vehicles aren't standard, it's quite hard to get the technician to do that. Generally, the same lab who do the historic study will do the ficha as well. Then you also need a verification certificate from an historic club. So an historic club will verify the vehicle and say, yep, we've seen the vehicle and it's historic. Okay, so once you've got those 3 documents, you then have to register those documents with the industry department of the local government, of the Junta de Andalucia. The Junta de Andalucia, then I believe it gets sent to Sevilla, I believe, where the head office is, and then it comes back here to Malaga, and if you have got a successful verification, they will issue a document called a resolution. Now with the resolution, you can go to the ITV centre, you can book the ITV test, and then you take the vehicle and they use the resolution to pass the ITV test and issue you with a ficha técnica, or 3 bits of paper. One is for the tax office, one is for trafico, and one gets returned to you with the matriculation number on it, which I'll explain in a moment. But let's back up and talk about the documents which you need for the ITV station. So the document, which is the historic verification, here in Malaga, for example, there used to be 2 companies that did it. One of them was the University of Malaga, the other one I'm not going to mention the name. Unfortunately, the university, who were very good at this, had to close its division that did this. And there is another private company that does it now. But to be honest, our experience has been shocking with them. Apart from, even if you get good paperwork from them, and that goes to the government, that can still take up to 6 months to come out. If the paperwork they produce is erroneous in any way at all, then that will go to the government. The government will then knock that back. And that will then have to be rectified, and that will have to go back to the government. Okay, so that could take a year for the resolution to come out. You know, if you are lucky enough that they get it right the first time, and it goes to the government, and the government sees something they don't like, the industry department of the Junta de Andalucia, then they will still knock it back. So I want to give you one example that we had one go through, and after 9 months it came back because there was stickers in the window, and they wanted the stickers taken out of the car, they wanted new photos doing, and they wanted the historic study to be redone and resubmitted because of the stickers in the window. They weren't original. Yes, I can say that now. And I'm going to move on to another problem with the ITV as well. We had another one where there'd been mistakes because basically they'd taken a template. It was from an MG. They'd taken a template from an MG and they used the wrong. They also used documentation for a similar vehicle, sent it in, and the measurements were wrong according to the government. So they had to come back. That took a year to resolve. And I'm trying to think of more that we've had now. The problems is they always seem to come back with a few problems. Yes, a lot of the time you have where VIN numbers and stuff just haven't been stamped, or you might have different VIN numbers. For example, we had there was a Porsche which had a VIN number which was stamped in the EU, I believe, and then when it went to America, it had a different VIN number put on it, and then when it came back, it was re-registered in the EU, and they used the American number, which wasn't the correct number because it should have been the chassis number, and that gets confusing as well. And unfortunately, the people who are doing the paperwork don't advise you correctly which VIN number you should be using. If that goes off to the government, you come back and you've got a problem. Things like there was another MG we had which had a complete body work reform done to it, and they re-stamped the VIN, and the VIN was re-stamped wrong. So that caused all sorts of confusions and absolute nightmares. So you have to check everything is 100% clear, and also have very big faith in the people doing the paperwork to make sure that they're going to get it right. And even if that happens and they do get it right and you get your resolution back the first time, then it could still take 6 months. At the point of going to the ITV test, you also have to remember that it's now the interpretation of the ITV. So we had one T2, I think it was a Volkswagen T2, which got through first time through the resolution process. So they accepted it. It didn't have a VIN stamp, or the VIN stamp wasn't clear, so we got a certificate and got it re-stamped, and that was an official certificate to say the vehicle is what it was, and the re-stamping, etc., etc. They accepted that in the government. We had this resolution in our hand. We went to the ITV, and they just ripped us to bits. They basically said there was a tow bar on the vehicle, which had been included in the original documentation, which the ITV said wasn't original and needed taking off, which meant that we had to go all the way back to the beginning, do new documentation, send it back to the government, which then the government contested it and said, we've already approved this. We said, yes, but now you need to prove it without the tow bar on. Had to send them the document from the ITV which showed they'd failed it. They disagreed. This went on for about 6 months. It's not a quick process. We're looking at a year now already. And eventually, when we then took it back, the ITV turned around and then had a query about the brakes. So I'm not a mechanic, and I don't particularly know, I do a lot of registrations, lots about cars, but instead of disc brakes, the owner had put disc brakes on the vehicle because the old brakes, which were the drum style brakes, didn't stop the vehicle. So it was a safety thing, and I think the disc brakes have been on for a good 25-30 years anyway, because old drum brakes, they didn't make them anymore, and they didn't stop the vehicle. This is how I explained it to the ITV when we were speaking to them, but they knocked it back because disc brakes aren't original. So they made him put the original drum brakes on, which then subsequently failed the ITV because they don't stop the car. So or the vehicle. So eventually we managed to get the well, I didn't, the mechanic did, got the drum brakes to work sufficiently to pass the ITV, and after about a year and a half we finally got the vehicle through. But that's just to tell you, you know, even if you get to the point of having a resolution, then you go to ITV, it is the interpretation of the ITV as well. Now, coming on to the DGT, which is where you finally register the vehicle, you need to have more photos of the vehicle, the documents from the ITV, the tax paid, special registrations tax paid, and here's a biggie and a very big one, the original documentation for the vehicle. If it's a duplicate of the original documentation for the country of origin, that's not a problem, but you have to have original documentation. And the reason I'm telling you this is because we were told, under no certain terms, from a company that does the historic documentation, that it wasn't needed. It's not needed, that you can go to notary, you can sign a declaration to say that you're the owner of the vehicle. It's normal that old historic vehicles lose the documentation and you can't get duplicates, okay? In our experience, that is absolute rubbish, okay? Every single time you approach the DGT, then they turn around and say, we need original documentation. You say, but I've got something from the notary that says I own it, I've declared it, I've got witnesses that say that it's my vehicle. They just say no. We were then reverted back to the company who gave us the initial advice, and they just washed their hands of it and said, oh, well, the DGT is stupid, and then you get to a whole circle of whose fault is it and how do we resolve it. So I would say if you haven't got original documentation for an historic vehicle, I would definitely not attempt to register it, and you could spend a lot of money going all the way through the process, paying the taxes, getting to the point where it's past the ITV, you get to the DGT to register it and they say, where's original documents? Okay, so the original documents aren't actually needed for the resolution. They're not needed for the ITV, but you get to the DGT, they're going to ask you for them. Something else to point out is that you have to be registered on the padron. For some reason, even if it's a non-resident, and a non-resident has quite the right to come over and register a vehicle here if they want to, and I'm going to get on to if you can drive a non-Spanish registered vehicle in Spain in a minute, then they still they won't give you the resolution. You're on the padron, and a non-resident shouldn't be on the padron. anyway. And by the time you get to the end of the process, you'd need to be registered on the padron. At the beginning, it would have gone over the 90 days, so you're going to need to update that to register with DGT. Now, a lot of people are thinking, well, historic vehicles in the UK, they don't need an MOT, so why can't I just take it to Spain and drive it? That's it, it's insured. Why not? Keep it in my garage, take it out when I feel like it. I'm a non-resident. Okay, well, the first thing is that is any vehicle, the DVLA from the UK consider any vehicle that's been out of the country for more than 12 months as permanently exported. So, you definitely can't keep it out for more than 12 months. How do they know that? I don't know, but that's what they think. If you're a resident in Spain, you can't drive a foreign registered vehicle. Don't look for ways around it. It's rubbish. We get asked all the time, or how can I keep it for 6 months, take it back? Don't bother. And even more so now, the police are all over it. They don't care. British cars, it's not even within the EU. If you are a resident, you can't drive a foreign registered car. And if you just need to start the process. The reason we have P plates, the provisional plates, is so you can put them on and drive around during the registration process, which is quite difficult if you get a historic vehicle because they only last for 60 days. And as I explained before, historic registration can go on for over a year. Okay, so you can't drive a vehicle that's on historic plates and UK plates in Spain because you're just going to get a pull. And I know loads of people have had problems. People who have brought vehicles over, kept them in the garage, they only take them out once on a Sunday and end up with getting fined by the police. So yeah, that is basically a summary, 22 minutes almost, of registering historic vehicles from the UK and Spain and the pitfalls. We unfortunately here at Upsticks have decided this year we will not be processing any historic vehicle registrations because we depend too much on third-party providers who don't particularly do the job very well, and we also depend on the government, which is very, very unpredictable what they're going to ask for. And then obviously, between the ITV and the DGT, it's a minefield, and we can't offer a service which we can't guarantee will come out the other end. In other parts of Spain, I've heard that the historic process is quicker. So for Madrid, for example, I know people who have done, passed them through Madrid and they've done well. There's a company in Sevilla, the other side of Andalusia, apparently which are doing a very, very good job. But I'm afraid that's the decision we've taken. I hope this has served to explain a bit about the historic vehicle registration process and what taxes you could be in for if you bring one from the UK. But certainly with a normal vehicle, even now, even if you pay the import duty and tax with the high price of second-hand vehicles in Spain, sometimes it's still even worth bringing it. But for historic vehicles, I would seriously consider looking at your options of buying in Spain, because historic vehicles generally tend to be cheaper here in Spain. Evidently, if you bring one from the UK, it also has to be left-hand drive conformed, so you'd have to change the headlights, etc. And the taxes, depending on the valuation, could be quite high. So it would be a consideration, really, apart from the shipping costs, the registration costs, and the uncertainty of the paperwork. If you would like to have an historic vehicle in Spain, I certainly would look at your options of buying one here first. Anyway, I hope that's helped and given you some information.